The Recollection of Forms of Spirit in James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. Maybe somebody would like to leave me some feedback in the comments to let me know how I'm doing. Am I speaking clearly enough? Although it is a bit difficult when you're discussing Joyce, of course. Section 2. But softly remember me. That's from the end of the wake. But soft. I think that's obviously taken from Romeo and Juliet. But soft. What light from yonder window breaks. I nearly forgot it then. The quote that everybody knows. Anyway, on with the business. Right. So, the particular form of spirit expressing itself thus far is of the most fundamental and thoroughly extreme kind. This is where we begin, as Hegel began, in the dialectic of consciousness, with sense certainty, the knowledge of knowing, which is at the start, or is immediately our object, cannot be anything else but immediate knowledge itself, a knowledge of the immediate or of what simply is. Our approach to the object must also be immediate or receptive. We must alter nothing in the object as it presents itself. In apprehending it, we must refrain from trying to comprehend it. The most fundamental and thoroughly extreme kind of forms of spirit. For while forms of spirit are characterized by internal complexity, by virtue of which contradictions and complications arise, and dialectic can proceed apace, this is not so for a form of spirit professing an immediacy. Forms of spirit are ideal, and yet have an empirical reality, in that there always exists an ultimate fact of the matter, whereby an assertion can be deemed true or false. If it is true to say of ALP that her hair, I'm quoting from the Wake now, and Olivia, her hair's as brown as ever was, and wavy. It is her hair being brown and wavy that makes the statement true. However, anything at all can accomplish such a feat, albeit if only in a very basic way of making something true. Whereupon, from the noisy, bustling confusion one encounters, there's an echo of William James there. He spoke about the buzzing, booming confusion. The noisy, bustling confusion one encounters, through perceiving the world, the desire for knowledge to be free of all the conditions that make it knowledge becomes pressing. Hegel talks in terms of responsibility here, which is to say that which is immediate is not really immediate. I should have said sense certainty professes immediacy, but there is no immediacy in Hegel. Which is immediate is not really immediate at all, but is the expression of a desire to be liberated from mediation of the responsibility of having to discern divergences and contrariness between the true and the false. quote here from the Philosophy of Mind, Philosophy of Spirit rather. The return of consciousness into itself, which is directly mingled with pure apprehension of the object, for this return into itself has shown itself to be essential to perception, alters the truth. Consciousness at once recognizes this aspect as its own and takes responsibility for it. By doing so, it will obtain the true object in its purity. So, a form of spirit that is in denial, in effect. For responsibility suggests that there is some sort of reflecting transpiring. Immediacy is naught but an epistemological delusion, a delusion recognized through the epiphany that knowledge is made of but flimsy material, forever open to question, vulnerable to erosion through skeptical doubt. Responsibility suggests the need for a certain kind of reflection that can sort the true from the false, for the falsity lies within the subject. This fear of error is error itself. And here we have a process demonstrating that error is omnipresent in the conditioning of the possibility of such a form of spirit in the first place. And what is thereby expressed is an awareness of knowledge as beset with problems, together with a desire to be set free from such a problematic character. Philosophy steels itself against being bewitched by the world in diverse ways. I lost my place there. Philosophy steels itself against being bewitched by the world in diverse ways. And as a consequence, all forms of spirit have something of a chimerical nature about them, of fictionality, of the fantastical, and the philosophical imagination that produced the phenomenology of spirit, and the literary imagination that produced Finnegans Wake, connect in this regard. In virtue of raising questions concerning forms of spirit regarding this make-believe in one's being in the world, then whatever it might be that lends coherence to that way of being is also questioned. The notion of knowledge ever being guaranteed is a delusion. And the concern here is not simply to do with dusty philosophical deliberating, grounded upon a supposition that there is a subject that relates to the world by virtue of knowing or representing the world. I'm not very good at multitasking. The longing for certainty is the longing to ground one's relation and connectedness to the world, to situate oneself in the world. An ominous shadow hangs over this longing, a murky revelation or epiphany. I like using that word epiphany, a very Joycean concept. that discloses that one's doubtful and unverifiable presuppositions concerning the world are naught but a mere dream, naught but make-believe, naught but a notional schemata, naught but symbols getting in the way of ideas about the world, however one cares to think about it. And yet this make-believe, this promise of absolute indubitability, that is in reality a mere fantasy, it has its logical character. And this is why an inquiry into forms of spirit expressed in a literary narrative, perhaps especially so in a fantastical dream narrative like The Wake, is so fruitful. The recollection of spiritual forms engenders a series of negations. For instance, the certainty that is supposed to go with immediate sensation will negate anything that might be entitled to the status of a form of mediation, anything that may intercede between the subject and the world, while simultaneously asseverating that it has no role to perform in the subject's connection with the world, and that every seemingly relevant mediation takes no part. Such a form of spirit, it transpires, is a derivative stance emerging from out of the morass of epistemological reflection. Now, I'm going to quote from The Wake. I should have put this on the slide, really, but epistemology for deep, dwarfy doubtlings. I shall put that in the description because it's important. Epistole, Greek, written communication. Letter. Episteme, Greek, for knowledge. Epistemologia, Greek, science of knowledge. Epistolothemologia, Greek, science of that which is discussed in letters, because there is a letter that is much discussed in The Wake. Epistle-made themology for deep, dwarfy doubtlings, as we will discover with the mysterious letter from Boston. In the opening chapter of The Wake, there is a collecting of letter from the past, but there is no historical privilege with regard to the immediate objects of sense. Knowledge is most certainly not bound by them, nor are they logically the most primitive, for there is no such thing. The form of spirit is primarily phenomenological. The epistemological anxiety infusing The Wake's opening chapter can be felt, for there can only be a certain immediate sensation against some background understanding of how epistemology appears to begin with, and then all of the diverse possible directions may be placed into some kind of phenomenological order, roughly from the most simple to the most complex. And the operative power of recollection enables the process. Intuitions are retained for future use. They may be summoned to the mind at will, and the summoning of it to the mind at will, that is to say, a sensory intuition of an object in space and time, is thereby present, whereupon through recollection it is recalled within the privacy of the mind, and thereupon can be altered at will by the imagination for recollection This is an imaginative construction. Right, going back to the wake to illustrate what I'm on about. It was upon the tram rolling toward Dublin on the road between Williamstown and Aylesbury that Anna Olivia recalls first seeing the love light in Humphrey's eye. When he looked at her, as if to pass away in a cloud, and in a sweat beside her, her memories of him are just as like he were wishing to be pardoned. He said he daydreams she had a lovely face for a pantomime. So, Anna can recall the moment and the look upon the visage of one so deeply affected with the feeling of attraction, and yet, however this may appear to her, she can re-imagine it. Perhaps his eyes have a far-away look, or one that is piercing, or the words that he spoke are eloquent and reassuring, or hesitant and ill-chosen. However, through recollection and imagination in operation together may involve images. In memory, any dependency upon images can be discarded in virtue of the special character of language, that is to say, that system of signs that liberates one from an exclusive concern with the individual and the momentary, with what is present, and grants to one the capacity for a conception of the universal. So there's a quote from the Phenomenology of Spirit. It is as universal too that we utter what the sensuous content is. Language is the more truthful. In it we directly refute what we mean to say, and since the universal is the true content of sense certainty, and language expresses this true content alone, it is just not possible for us to say or express in words a sensuous being that we mean. Herein lies the problem, however. With regard to the recollection of forms of spirit in the wake, memory is the facility of holding on to words and what they mean. It is in names that we think. That is from the philosophy of mind, not to be confused with the phenomenology of mind. It can recall them and employ them as and when the need arises. And yet, whatever it is that is meant cannot get into the words themselves. For words are symbols. There is a triple process in operation here. A subject overcomes the otherness of an object, thereby rendering the object its own conscious possession. As he says in the philosophy of mind, memory no longer has to do with the image, which is derived from intuition, from in the intelligence when it is determined in an immediate, unspiritual manner. It has rather to do with the reality that is the product of intelligence itself, a reality known inside out that remains enclosed in the inside of intelligence and is its outside, its existing side, only with intelligence itself. And what does that mean? From a phenomenologic point of view, what is it like for a subject to have an object as its own conscious possession? A discussion of the mysterious letter from Boston, following on from that of the detritus gathered in the landscape of Dublin, the historic and legendary evidence of HCE's all-suffusing presence may prove somewhat illuminating in this regard, for the letter can serve as part representative of the text as a whole, a synecdoche, as we call it. By means of a deliberation upon the letter, characters and personalities that feature in the wake, together with the narrator him or herself, or the narrators themselves, can converse openly and unencumbered upon the subject of a narrative that they themselves are engaged in, and without the narrative thereupon being dismantled into the oddity and contradictoriness of self-referentiality. Formal correspondences are there in the text, and so too are unintended correspondences or coincidences. Now, the role of coincidence is a bit of a tricky matter. It is mere chance that it is there as part of the script, the kind of thing taken up in the art of the aleatory. John Cage, for instance, with his Music of Changes, 1951, offers a musical composition that uses chance throughout, or rather utilises the I Ching, a Chinese text, the purpose of which, is often referred to in the wake. The Chinese text, the purpose of which is for the divination, a system of symbols with which to set about identifying order in chance events. Similarly, chance correspondences arising through mistakes can find their way into art too. I give an example here of how that could happen from Elizabeth Bishop and her poem Mammoth, or As It Appeared, the Man Moth, because of a misprint. Here above, cracks in the buildings are filled with battered moonlight. The whole shadow of man is only as big as his hat. But when the man moth pays his rare, although occasional visits to the surface, the moon looks rather different to him. But what is chance and what is meaningful correspondence? I feel spirits of itchery ouching from all over me. That's a reference to the I Ching in Finnegans Wake. After the form of spirit that is the certainty of sensation with its putative immediacy emerges that of the understanding that can distinguish these. To be continued.